Aaron Rodgers is the most hated player in the NFL. I mean, think about it. Aaron Rodgers' time with the Jets was an absolute disaster. The guy was supposed to turn them into contenders, but instead, it's been 2 straight years of failure. His first season, 4 snaps. That's it. He tore his Achilles and missed the entire year. The Jets gave up multiple picks to get him, including a first rounder, and they didn't even get a full drive out of him. They had a condition in the trade that would have turned a second-round pick into a first if he played 65% of the snaps. But that obviously didn't happen. Fast forward to this season, and it somehow got worse. He came back in his first game, a 32-19 loss to the 49ers. He threw for 167 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. That's not franchise changing. A guy that was supposed to be the savior of the Jets. Nothing changed. I mean, he looked kind of better in the home opener, throwing for 281 yards and 2 touchdowns in a win over the Patriots. But then it all collapsed. In Week 5, he hit 60,000 career passing yards, but also threw 3 interceptions, including the one that sealed a 23-17 loss to the Vikings. The Jets head coach was fired right after that game, and some people even thought Rodgers had a role in it. The losing kept piling up. He threw another game-losing interception against Buffalo, then went 4 straight games without leading a win. By the time he finally broke his streak in Week 9, they were already out of playoff contention. He finished the year with 3,897 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. The Jets finished 5-12, and now they're cutting him to save money. 2 years, and all they got was a mess. I mean, statistically, he didn't have the worst season. Actually, he had a decent season statistically. But you ask any Jet fan, and he wasn't that guy. And this wasn't some random thing that he ended up with the Jets. Aaron Rodgers' standoff with the Packers during the 2021 offseason wasn't just messy. It was an all-out disaster. This wasn't some minor contract dispute. It was months of public drama that made Rodgers look selfish, petty, and impossible to please. It all started when reports surfaced that Rodgers was so unhappy with the front office that he wanted out of Green Bay, and not just that. He allegedly told the team he'd rather retire or have the general manager fired than continue playing under the current leadership. That's insane. It's one thing to be frustrated with management, but demanding that someone lose their job just to keep you happy? That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And then came the holdout. Rodgers completely skipped the team's off-season workouts, making it clear that he wasn't backing down. The Packers were trying to focus on the upcoming season, but instead, all anyone could talk about was whether Rodgers was ever going to play for them again. This dragged on for months, dominating headlines and turning the entire franchise into a soap opera. Fans were furious. This wasn't just some average player throwing a fit. This was the reigning, most valuable player, the face of the franchise, refusing to show up. In Wisconsin, where Rodgers had been treated like a hero for over a decade, people were so fed up that they actually booed his image when it appeared on a stadium jumbotron at a baseball game. That's unheard of. For a guy who had won them a championship, the reasons behind Rodgers' anger only made the situation worse. He was reportedly upset that the Packers drafted a quarterback in the first round the previous year without telling him first. Shout out Jordan Love. But to make it even pettier, one report claimed he was still mad that the team cut a 5th-string wide receiver, Jake Kumerow, after he publicly praised him. A 5th-string receiver. Then, more stories leaked. Rodgers was reportedly mocking the Packers general manager in group texts with teammates. He had allegedly been telling teammates with expiring contracts that he wasn't coming back, which may have even impacted free agency decisions. And as if that wasn't enough, he was supposedly pushing for a trade to the Broncos behind the scenes. At this point, it didn't matter how great Rodgers was on the field. His off-the-field antics were making him look like the biggest diva in the league. Instead of handling his frustrations behind closed doors, he let it turn into a public circus. The Packers, one of the league's most storied franchises, were suddenly in turmoil. And Rodgers was the reason why? And after all of that, what happened? Rodgers came back right before the season started, like nothing ever happened. Months of drama, months of making the Packers look like a dysfunctional mess, just for him to walk back in at the last second. No apology, no accountability, nothing. By the time it was over, Rodgers had made it clear. If things didn't go his way, he'd take the whole team down with him. But Rodgers didn't magically become hated the past few years alone. He's been one of the most hated his whole career. Let's go back to 2012, when his leadership was openly questioned. It wasn't just some random analyst or a frustrated fan. This came from the agent of his own teammate, Jermichael Finley. The agent went on Twitter and flat out said Rodgers was a great quarterback, but not a great leader. That's brutal. It instantly sparked a media firestorm, with people debating whether Rodgers had issues in the locker room. Rodgers and coach Mike McCarthy tried to brush it off, calling the comments silly and ignorant, but the damage was already done. Once that kind of criticism goes public, it's impossible to ignore. The worst part? This wasn't coming from an opponent or an outsider. It was coming from someone representing one of his top targets on the team. That means there had to be at least some tension behind the scenes. Rodgers' leadership had already been questioned before, but this moment blew it wide open. Was he tough to get along with? Did his teammates actually respect him? Those questions followed him for years, and every time another controversy popped up, this moment got dragged back into the spotlight. Even though Finley himself didn't make the comment, having his agent say it made people wonder how many other teammates felt the same way, but just didn't say it out loud. By the way, if you guys enjoy these deep dives, I'll be posting almost every day during this season and off season. I genuinely appreciate if you could subscribe. Thanks. Anyways, Rodgers. A year later, one of his teammates said the exact same thing. What about in the summer of 2013, when former teammate Greg Jennings went after him publicly? After leaving Green Bay for the rival Vikings, Jennings didn't hold back. He straight up said it felt like it was so-and-so and the team instead of a real team effort. That's a brutal look for a quarterback who's supposed to be the leader. Rodgers brushed it off, but this was way bigger than just one comment. Jennings made it clear that Rodgers didn't like being questioned. He said Rodgers always heard how great he was, so when teammates tried to hold him accountable, he wasn't open to it. That's a massive red flag for a guy running an offense. And it wasn't just Jennings. Donald Driver backed him up, saying Rodgers wouldn't take pressure off his teammates when they messed up. Instead of covering for them, he'd let them take the heat. This wasn't just about football. It was about Rodgers' entire leadership style. The idea that he put himself above the team, that he didn't take responsibility the way a leader should, and that he held grudges forever just made him even more polarizing. Jennings even admitted years later that Rodgers probably never forgave him for speaking out. For most quarterbacks, teammates rally around them, but for Rodgers, it seemed like more and more guys kept coming out with stories like this. When you're supposed to be the face of a franchise and your own receivers are calling you out, that's a major problem. This was just another reason why so many people couldn't stand Rodgers. But what about this? In April of 2019, when a bombshell article exposed years of dysfunction between him and former Packers head coach Mike McCarthy. The report, loaded with accounts from former teammates and team personnel, painted an ugly picture of Rodgers as egotistical, difficult to work with, and even outright disrespectful to his coach. One of the biggest takeaways? Rodgers allegedly ignored McCarthy's play calls and fostered a tense locker room atmosphere. That's not just bad leadership. It's a complete disaster for a franchise quarterback. And it wasn't just one or two people saying this. Former teammate Ryan Grant also spoke out, sharing stories that reinforced Rodgers' reputation as a toxic presence in the locker room. Rodgers, of course, was furious. He fired back on ESPN Milwaukee radio, calling the article a smear attack from bitter ex-players with an agenda. He claimed they were just trying to stir up old drama and dismissed the entire thing as lies. But here's the problem. There were too many people saying the same things for it to be ignored. It wasn't just one disgruntled former teammate, it was multiple key players from his own offense, guys who had spent years alongside him, all confirming the same issues. Rodgers tried to downplay it by calling it a battle of two alpha males who were hyper-competitive and stubborn. But that explanation didn't exactly erase the accusations. The report suggested that Rodgers' inability to coexist with McCarthy held the team back from becoming a dynasty. That's a massive indictment on a quarterback who was supposed to be the leader of a franchise. The article didn't just bring up old drama, it reshaped how people viewed Rodgers. Before, some fans saw him as a misunderstood competitor, but after this, the narrative completely shifted. He wasn't just a polarizing figure. He was now seen as a quarterback who actively contributed to his team's underachievement. Rodgers could call it a hit piece all he wanted, but the damage was done. It was now impossible to ignore the growing list of people who had problems with him. This wasn't just another controversy, it was a full-blown indictment of his leadership. And then off the field, things got even uglier. In January of 2017, his own father confirmed the family feud. This wasn't just some former teammate or a random analyst. This was his dad publicly saying they hadn't spoken since 2014. That's 3 full years of silence. And to make it even worse, he didn't just say they lost touch. He straight up said, fame can change things. This instantly became a huge story. People had already questioned Rodgers' personality, but hearing it from his father made it feel like undeniable proof. The idea that Rodgers let stardom get to his head and push his own family away just fueled the narrative that he was self-absorbed and difficult to be around. Of course, we can't judge a man for his personal relationships, but this definitely had people talking. But remember this one. By the mid-2010s, Aaron Rodgers was getting blasted for playing for stats. Critics started noticing that he wasn't throwing the same balls as other top quarterbacks. And it wasn't because he couldn't make the throws, it was because he didn't want to hurt his stats. Veteran NFL writer Bob McGinn called Rodgers out, saying he had for years played a careful, calculating game and deliberately avoided big play opportunities just to protect his interception numbers. That's not just playing smart, that's hurting the team. A quarterback's job is to win games, not just maintain a high passer rating. But for Rodgers, it seemed like avoiding picks mattered more than making the tough throws to keep drives alive. It became painfully obvious in the playoffs. Over and over, Rodgers would dominate the regular season, rack up awards, and then disappear in the biggest moments. The Packers secured the top seed in the conference in back-to-back years, and both times, they failed to even reach the Super Bowl. Instead of taking risks when it mattered, Rodgers kept playing it safe. And it wasn't just about the stats. His attitude made it even worse. After tough losses, Rodgers rarely took responsibility. He would say the team needed to improve, but he almost never put the blame on himself. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Other quarterbacks own their mistakes, but Rodgers always seemed to deflect. It made him look like he cared more about his image than actually leading his team. The criticism only grew when people started comparing him to other quarterbacks. McGinn pointed out that in a playoff game against San Francisco, Jimmy G, who was dealing with just as much pressure, made tight window throws down the field because he wasn't afraid of making a mistake. Rodgers, on the other hand, kept playing it safe, which ultimately cost his team. But this might be the biggest one. Aaron Rodgers' COVID-19 controversy in the fall of 2021 wasn't just another scandal. It was a nationwide firestorm. It wasn't just about football. It turned into a massive debate over trust, responsibility, and Rodgers' willingness to say anything. And the worst part, he brought it all on himself. Back in August of 2021, Rodgers was asked a simple, direct question. Are you vaccinated? His response, yeah, I've been immunized. That choice of words turned out to be a disaster. At the time, it sounded like he was confirming he was vaccinated, and most people took it that way. He even followed it up by saying he wouldn't judge teammates who weren't vaccinated, which only reinforced the idea that he had gotten the shot himself. But 3 months later, the truth came out in the worst possible way. In November, Rodgers tested positive for COVID-19. That alone wasn't the issue. The problem was that it immediately came to light that he was never actually vaccinated in the first place. He had spent months letting people believe he was, all while avoiding the league's stricter protocols for unvaccinated players. Suddenly, his immunized comment wasn't just misleading. It looked like a deliberate lie. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Fans, analysts, and even former players tore into him for deceiving the public. Instead of owning up to it, Rodgers made things even worse when he went on The Pat McAfee Show and doubled down. He didn't apologize. He didn't take responsibility. Instead, he started railing against cancel culture and the so-called woke mob. He claimed he had an allergy to an ingredient in the vaccines, but he never provided any proof. He also revealed that instead of taking a vaccine, he had undergone a homeopathic treatment to boost his antibody levels. He even admitted to taking ivermectin, a drug that was widely promoted as a COVID-19 treatment, despite having no scientific backing. At this point, the controversy exploded beyond just the sports world. Rodgers wasn't just being called out by football fans, he was being criticized by doctors, scientists, and major media outlets for spreading misinformation. He had turned what could have been a simple admission into a full-blown scandal. And the consequences came fast. The NFL fined Rodgers nearly $15,000 for violating COVID-19 protocols, including attending a Halloween party while unvaccinated. It was a slap on the wrist compared to the millions he was making, but it was still an official acknowledgement that he had broken the rules. That wasn't all. His longtime partnership with Prevea Health, a Wisconsin-based healthcare organization, ended almost immediately. They made it clear in their statement that they were committed to protecting their community and encouraging vaccination, something Rodgers clearly wasn't supporting. State Farm, one of Rodgers' biggest sponsors, tried to distance themselves without fully cutting ties. They released a statement saying they didn't agree with everything Rodgers had said, but respected his right to have an opinion. That was enough to keep the partnership alive for a little while, but by 2023, even they had moved on. The fallout from this mess was massive. Rodgers had spent years building a reputation as one of the NFL's most talented quarterbacks, but this controversy painted him as selfish, dishonest, and completely unwilling to take responsibility. The criticism wasn't just about his vaccination status, it was about how he handled it. He didn't just choose to remain unvaccinated. He misled people, avoided the protocols, and then played the victim when he got caught. And let's be real, this didn't just blow over. Even after the controversy started to die down, it permanently changed the way people saw Rodgers. His reputation took a hit that he never fully recovered from. Rodgers could have handled this in a completely different way. If he had been upfront from the beginning, owned his decision, and followed the league's rules, he might have avoided all of this, but instead, he tried to play both sides, got exposed, and then acted like he was the victim. That's why this controversy became one of the biggest moments in his career, not for anything he did on the field, but for the way he completely mismanaged a situation that didn't have to be a disaster. By the time the dust settled, Rodgers had made it clear. He wasn't just a quarterback, he was a walking controversy. And this was just another reason why so many people couldn't stand him. But then there was this, November of 2018, and this time, it was his own brother calling him out. Rodgers donated $1 million to wildfire relief efforts in California and urged others to support the victims. But his brother Jordan was not impressed. Instead of celebrating the gesture, Jordan blasted him on Twitter, saying Rodgers didn't even call their mom, who was in the fire's path and ready to evacuate. Jordan didn't just criticize him, he completely questioned his sincerity. He said if Rodgers couldn't even check on his own mother's safety, then the donation just felt like an act. But remember this one too. In May of 2022, he revealed that he turned down an offer to be Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s running mate. That's right, Rodgers claimed he was seriously considered as a vice presidential candidate. Just let that sink in for a second. Kennedy, a politician. Rodgers, a football player. When Rodgers publicly admitted that Kennedy actually wanted him as a running mate, that took things to a whole new level. Rodgers told CNN that he had two choices: retire from football and take the vice presidential role, or keep playing. He chose to keep playing, but the fact that this was even a conversation just made him look even more polarizing. It wasn't enough that he had already been at the center of a massive vaccine controversy the year before. Now, he was saying he nearly jumped into politics alongside one of the most infamous anti-vaccine figures in the country. By this point, Rodgers' reputation was already taking hit after hit, and this just added another reason for people to criticize him. Whether it was on the field or off, Rodgers kept finding ways to make himself the center of controversy. And the worst part, he never seemed to care. Instead of focusing on football, he was out here talking about becoming a vice president. But here's a recent one. Last year, Aaron Rodgers found himself at the center of controversy in January of 2024 after comments he made about late-night host Jimmy Kimmel sparked a strong reaction and threats of legal action. The situation began during Rodgers' appearance on the Pat McAfee Show, where he discussed a soon-to-be released list of high-profile individuals allegedly connected to Jeffrey Epstein. While talking about the topic, Rodgers mentioned Kimmel, saying, "There's a lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, who are really hoping that doesn't come out." The remark quickly gained attention, with some interpreting it as an implication that Kimmel had ties to Epstein. Kimmel responded swiftly and forcefully. He took to social media, writing, "Dear asshole, for the record, I've not met, flown with, visited, or had any contact whatsoever with Epstein, nor will you find my name on any list other than the clearly phony nonsense that soft-brained wackos like yourself can't seem to distinguish from reality." In addition to denying any connection, Kimmel expressed concern that Rodgers' statement could have real consequences. "Your reckless words put my family in danger. Keep it up, and we will debate the facts further in court," he added, making it clear he was considering legal action. Rodgers addressed the situation again the following week during another appearance on the Pat McAfee Show. He did not apologize but clarified his remarks, saying he understood how serious an allegation like that could be. "I totally understand how serious an allegation of pedophilia would be, so for him to be upset about that, I get it," Rodgers said. He also emphasized that he had not outright accused Kimmel of anything and was not claiming to have proof of wrongdoing. Rodgers also took the opportunity to criticize Kimmel for past jokes about him and others who had chosen not to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, suggesting that there had been unfair treatment in how different viewpoints were handled. He went on to say that he was glad Kimmel's name was not on any list and that his broader point was about ensuring transparency for those who were. The exchange between the two figures became a widely discussed topic, drawing reactions from fans and media alike. While some saw Rodgers' remarks as a casual comment blown out of proportion, others viewed them as a serious misstep. Similarly, while some supported Kimmel's strong response, others felt his reaction was excessive. Ultimately, the situation added another layer to Rodgers' history of public controversies. Whether this particular incident will have any lasting impact on his legacy remains to be seen, but it was yet another moment where his words extended far beyond the football field. And then looking after that, in August of 2024, Aaron Rodgers reflected on his controversial immunized comment from 2021, expressing regret over how he had phrased his response. His thoughts were shared in an unauthorized biography titled Out of the Darkness: The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers, written by Ian O'Connor, who interviewed the quarterback during the writing process. Rodgers made it clear that while he did not regret his personal decision regarding vaccination, he did wish he had been more transparent when initially discussing his status. He acknowledged that if there had been a follow-up question during the press conference in August of 2021, he would have provided a more detailed explanation. Had there been a follow-up to my statement that I had been immunized, Rodgers told O'Connor, I would have responded with this. I would have said, look, I'm not some sort of anti-vax flat earther. I am somebody who's a critical thinker. You guys know me. I march to the beat of my own drum. He went on to explain that his decision was rooted in his belief in personal freedom regarding medical choices. I believe strongly in bodily autonomy, in the ability to make choices for your body, he continued, according to O'Connor, not to have to acquiesce to some woke culture or crazed group of individuals who say you have to do something. Rodgers' comments reignited discussion about the controversy that had surrounded him in 2021, when his immunized remark led many to believe he was vaccinated, only for it to be revealed later that he was not. At the time, he faced significant backlash from both the media and the public, particularly after defending his stance on the Pat McAfee show. His remarks in the biography suggest that while he stands by his beliefs, he recognizes that clearer communication in 2021 could have changed how the situation unfolded. Whether this reflection alters public perception of the controversy remains to be seen, but it provides insight into how Rodgers views one of the most widely discussed moments of his career. But here's a bad one. In November of 2022, former Packers backup quarterback Deshaun Kaiser claimed that Aaron Rodgers had encouraged him to question the events of September 11th. During an appearance on the Brenneman Show podcast, Kaiser recounted an early conversation with Rodgers that took an unexpected turn. He shut the door, and the first thing that comes out of Aaron Rodgers' mouth was, "Do you believe in 9/11?" Kaiser said. According to him, Rodgers urged him to read up on that and go back and look into some of the conspiracies around it. Kaiser did not specify whether Rodgers fully endorsed any specific conspiracy theories, but he implied that the quarterback had a deep interest in alternative narratives. He also mentioned that their discussions expanded beyond September 11, touching on theories about inner Earth, the moon landing, and reptile people. Rodgers did not publicly respond to Kaiser's comments, and it remains unclear how serious he was about the conversation. However, the remarks added to a growing list of unconventional beliefs attributed to the quarterback, given Rodgers' history of outspoken opinions on various topics. Some saw this as another example of his willingness to challenge mainstream narratives, while others viewed it as another controversial moment in his career. Whether Rodgers was simply engaging in philosophical debate or genuinely questioning widely accepted historical events, the story fueled further discussion about his interest in conspiracy theories. For some, it reinforced his reputation as a deep thinker who questions everything. For others, it raised concerns about how seriously he considers fringe ideas. But the last one I want to talk about, his ayahuasca journey, is one of the wildest things an NFL player has ever openly admitted to, and people either find it fascinating or completely bizarre. Back in 2019, a high school friend told him he wasn't reaching his full potential. That's when he learned about ayahuasca, a traditional Amazonian drink with psychoactive ingredients that's been used for spiritual healing. His friend took part in a ceremony in Peru and claimed Rodgers was somehow the star of the show, even though he wasn't there. That got Rodgers interested, and soon enough, he and his then-girlfriend, Danica Patrick, made their own trip to Peru in early 2020. Rodgers swears the experience changed his life. He believes it helped him have the best season of his career, which led to back-to-back MVPs in 2020 and 2021. He doesn't believe in coincidences, So to him, this was the universe showing him his true path. He's talked about feeling like 100 hands were blessing him with love and forgiveness. He's described it as a deep connection to his ancestors, like something out of a movie. Some people think it's incredible. They see Rodgers as someone willing to explore life outside the typical athlete mindset. He's not afraid to dive into things that most people in the league would never touch, but others think it's just another example of him being out of touch. They hear about these psychedelic trips and roll their eyes, thinking it's just another excuse for him to act like he's on a different level than everyone else. What makes this even crazier is that ayahuasca actually played a role in mending one of his oldest friendships. Rodgers had a close friend from high school named Jordan Russell, but they had a falling out years ago. Rodgers even cut him off completely, something he's done to multiple people in his life. But after going on ayahuasca retreats together in Costa Rica, he had a change of heart. The two repaired their friendship, something that seemed impossible before. This is what Rodgers' critics hate about him. He preaches about healing, love, and forgiveness, but at the same time, he's known for cutting people out of his life whenever he feels like it. He's had falling outs with friends, teammates, and even his own family. His parents and brothers have been on bad terms with him for years, and some people don't believe that'll ever change. The ayahuasca trips also tied into his shift away from the religion he was raised in. Rodgers grew up in a Christian household, but at some point, he turned to other belief systems, including plant medicine. He says that change played a huge role in his family issues, making an already strained relationship even worse. Even though ayahuasca is banned in the United States, it didn't stop him from being open about it. He's spoken on multiple podcasts, explaining how it reshaped his life and his view of the world. He doesn't just think it helped his mindset, he believes it directly impacted his success. Whether it actually made him a better player or not, there's no doubt it influenced the way he sees football and life in general. For some people, Rodgers is a trailblazer. He's one of the few athletes willing to break the mold and talk about things most guys would never bring up. But for his critics, it's just another example of him thinking he's on another level. Either way, it's just another reason why he's one of the most polarizing players in NFL history. If you guys enjoyed this, I'll be posting almost every day during the season and off season. I genuinely appreciate if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.